What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
Running gear. Braking system. If Vectra is not in charged version OPC, brakes here are comparatively simple. In front, floating calipers and not very large discs. Rear brakes are also disc brakes, and on the most powerful, also ventilated. Mechanism of handbrake is built into the caliper. No special surprises with resource and reliability are not expected. Original pads serve for a long time. If the driving pace is quiet, and the car is with MKP, the front ones can serve 100,000. Discs survive 2 to 3 replacements of pads, so even now there are all chances to meet native rotors in front. The calipers do not tolerate cold and wet climates very well, but they are not very problematic. They serve their 5 to 10 years before repair with replacement of pins, pistons, and rubbers, if there was minimal maintenance. Problems are usually more in the rear, where the handbrake mechanism sours and the caliper housing can corrode in the place of installation of the gland of the screw drive axle, as well as the place of installation of the rear dust cover. Unfortunately, the list of troubles doesn't end there. Brake lines by the age of 10 years become rotten. Plastic protective coating starts to peel off, tubes swell. Also on the cars before restyling, the ABS block quite often fails, and front ABS sensors are also not particularly reliable. They often have corroded connector and broken wires in the place of exit from the ring. Add to this periodic problems with connectors of ABS wiring, both to sensors and to the block, and it turns out that the braking system still forces to invest. Fortunately, used parts are inexpensive, but the front ABS sensors are assembled with the hub, so it's hard to save money. Sometimes you can trade new sensors in Saab hub. There is the same hub, but with its own sensor on the 9th of March too. Many thrifty Saabists when replacing take a cheaper hub from Vectra and put the old Saab sensor, so the new Vectra after such repairs is lying unnecessary. The maximum budget solution is to buy a similar sensor from Fiat Chroma of the second generation, for example, ABE CCZ 1383 ABE, which is produced separately from the hub and quite suitable for Vectra. Detail original price of non-original 2 brake system front brake pads 7 142.83 382 Fenix 1103 rear. Pads not available 82928 Fenix 747 front brake disc 285 by 25 mm 6 506 976 Fenix 1937 brake disc rear 278 by 12 mm 10 651 2 PCs. 82900 Techstar 5060 suspension. The suspension of the Vectra C is absolutely typical. McPherson at the front and multi-lever at the rear. Just like in the predecessor, according to the fashion of the early 2000s, a huge support bearing in a plastic housing was used at the front. It does not live long in the mud. The modernized dust cover, which appeared after 2004, does not help either. The resources increased, but still the node remains a consumable, and cracking when turning the steering wheel is a standard fear of the owner. The front lever on Vectra C became aluminum, with a non-replaceable ball. Its resource is quite decent, 100,000+ kilometers, but the price is not small, for €350. Non-original variants from FAG or Magneti Marelli will cost about 3 times cheaper, and the resource will be less, but not critically. But Chinese cheap replacements will last from 15 to 40,000 maximum. If you want, you can try to install a replacement ball joint in the old lever or buy in Belarus a set for welding a new mount for a replacement ball joint for Lancer ball joints. The rear suspension also has its weak points. First of all, the life of the boomerang, the sickle arm, or rather, its silent blocks, is short. At first, its price was almost like the front, but over time fell. Even the original is €60 to €70, and non-original, about 25. And the resource is usually acceptable. All rear suspension arm silents are now replaceable, and this is a big plus. By 100,000 mileage usually wore out the rubbers, not only boomerang, but also longitudinal and supporting arms, so that 15 to 20-year-old Vectra will certainly have to more or less regularly invest in this. The average check for reassembly, about €200 only on the levers and silent blocks, not counting shock absorbers and springs, which may also require replacement. By the standards of Opels, The expenses for maintenance of the running gear of the Vectra C turned out to be a bit high. Opelists of the old school, accustomed to the fact that the suspension was out by the moment when the body starts to fall apart, and spare parts are given for free and paid for, were extremely dissatisfied, so that the wave of curses spread regularly in the community. Therefore, when reading angry reviews, it is worth keeping this fact in mind. By today's standards, the price of maintenance for a D-Class car is quite acceptable, especially since the prices for parts have significantly decreased over the last 10 years. Detail original price of non-original 2 suspension front L-arm 23 629 VTR 4 262 Monroe 7022 front arm. Rear support 3 775 Lemfeder 2 226 Febby 2 225 front shock absorber 9 393 Monroe 2 421 KYB 4 276 ball bearing 2 777 Mapco 366 AS metal. 595 front hub 10 494 FAG 7 466 Trail I 4 152 outer rear ball joint cross arm 3 580 SKF 473 Monroe 1074 steering on Vectra is rack and pinion, with EGUR, except for OPC versions and with 2.8T engine, where there is a usual mechanical pump. Immediately about the sad thing, the original pump on the pre-styling costs €2,500, on the restyling, about half the price. The CIM unit, which was discussed in the electronics section electronics, is about 900 more. Of course, a typical Russian car repair shop will offer you just such a repair budget in case of problems, and on cars with mileage. 200 plus their occurrence is a matter of time. But don't run to sell a kidney, everything can be restored or replaced with a used one, and new non-original pumps are available literally from €150. How to postpone the doomsday? First of all, you need to know that the pump requires regular fluid replacement, at least once every 30,000. On dirty oil, the pump slowly dies, at the same time killing the rail, where the inner surface wears out. The second typical trouble of the rack is leakage of oil seals, but it is not because of dirt, but because of overheating, as the standard radiator is obviously not enough for full cooling. At high mileage the electric motor also fails. Regularly there are problems with the wiring to the pump and the voltage in the car. onboard network strongly jumps when it works. Everything is not well divorced. Transmission. General problems: all cars are strictly front-wheel drive, and decisions in transmission are very conservative, time-tested. The range of units is wide, but for some unknown reason the number of variants of automatic transmissions with low-power motors is very limited. First-part manual transmissions, there are several variants of mechanics here. With gasoline engines 1.6 and 1.8, put the old ICP series of own development F17. With engines 2.2, 5-speed F23 of GetRag production. With engines 3.2 and diesel engines 2.0 and 2.2, again 5-speed F35. With gasoline supercharged 2.0, 6-speed GetRag M32, well. And with diesels and 2.8T, the most powerful box from the arsenal of Opel, F40. All these transmissions are with a hydraulic release, not cheap, but reliable. The biggest problem is with F17s, which are developed on the basis of the old F13 box for motors up to 1.6 litres. On Vectra C they work with motors 1.8 up to 140 forces, and the car itself is heavy, much heavier than all Vectras before. Even with the 1.6 motors on the Vectra B, these F17s died regularly, and on the Vectra C the odds became very high. When buying, to listen to it on the elevator for the characteristic howling is obligatory. First of all, the front bearing of the secondary shaft dies, size 47x27x19.5, killing at the same time the seating place on the shaft. Over time, there are also problems with primary shaft backlash. If nothing is done, then irreversible damage gets the box body, and wear items get the differential. The latter, by the way, can suffer not only in the chain because of the bearing, it is enough to him high loads and air or dirty oil. At the critical moment the differential breaks out a piece of the box body by the axis of satellites. In theory, you can grind the shaft seat for a smaller diameter bearing, and if you choose a quality replacement bearing with good thrust and radial load, the shaft will still live. In practice, it turns out that the only possible replacement is an industrial bearing of 20 by 47 by 18 mm. In this case, the shaft must be machined to a diameter more than twice as small as the factory one. A logical question arises: won't the shaft break from such manipulations? It will definitely break if the shaft machining is done in violation of technology, which happens all the time. Similar story with the alternative option, to make a bushing in the housing for the bearing of the original size. In theory, it is possible, but in practice it is necessary to choose the right material and do everything carefully. The third option is to buy a used F17, which is also not so easy, given that the problem is in the design itself. Almost all of them are already killed, so it is necessary in any case to reassemble them before installation. There are reinforced differentials, but they are very expensive, more expensive than the control itself. Old-timers will remember that on Vectra B, in case of critical wear, F17 was replaced by much more durable F16, which had no such problems. And this control cost pennies. Yes, it was necessary to change drives and hubs, but it is not so essential. Alas, on Tetsi to put the old automatic transmission will not work, it just rests in the rack. In general, the least problematic options are two. Either to buy a new, after factory restoration, box F17, realizing that the resource is unlikely to be more than 120 to 150,000. Or, not to get in touch with small-liter Vectra C. 5-stage ICP GetRag of F23 series is much stronger, though sometimes die because of bearings wear, but it happens very rarely. From the disadvantages we can remember only that the shift mechanism is very sensitive to backlash of the rocker and the complexity. With oil change, which must be poured through the upper breather, otherwise the recommended volume will not fit. The box M32 is also Getragoff's. It is a modern 3-shaft and very compact, but the problems with it are not less than with F17. Bearings die in the same way, most often, secondary shaft. There is a problem with cooling. When driving at high speed it gets hotter than 120 degrees, and it has only natural air cooling. In addition, the bearings obviously lack lubrication due to defects in the design of the front cover. As in the case with F17, it is very easy to kill the differential with bearing wear products. Repair is not cheap, but on the plus side, it is possible to change bearings without removing the transmission from the machine. Over time, the manufacturer changed the problematic front cover M32 for bearings of larger diameter, 62 mm instead of 55 mm, and provided it with channels for lubrication. The problem was lost. The F40 series box is also 3-shaft and 6-speed, but it is already own. There are no questions with bearings here. Everything is very reliable. They fail very rarely. You just need to keep an eye on the oil level. But gears, made on new technologies, sometimes do not differ in quality. In theory, this box holds 450 plus Nm of torque, which is enough for any motor, and in practice this value is even higher, up to 600 Nm. However, sometimes gears shear in harmless situations, for example, after shock load. Usually suffer the third and fifth gears, and the box in this case is not a survivor. Repair makes no sense. Used ones are extremely cheap. For comparison, at the price of used F17 in 400 to 600 euros, F40 in decent condition can be found for 250. Automatic boxes. Vectra was unlucky and lucky with automatics at the same time. With 2.2, 3.2, and 3-litre diesel engines, the car was equipped with rather successful 5-speed Aisin AW55-50, and then its upgraded version AW55-51 under designation AF23, AF33. With 2.8T engines and 1.9 diesel engines, a newer 6-speed Aisin TF80SC, also successful, was installed under the designation AF40-6. The trouble is that the most mass cars with 1.6 and 1.8 engines were deprived of normal automatic transmission. The 1.6 did not have any automatic gearboxes at all, and the 1.8 was equipped only with Easytronic robot. In theory, it was available somewhere with GM VT20 variator, but in practice it is impossible to meet such a car both in Russia and in Europe. The mechanical part of the robot is based on the F17 automatic transmission with all its shortcomings, with electric drives of the clutch and gear selection mechanism. This is a very simple and cheap variant of automation of the automatic transmission, the more so that ABS is deprived of the anti-rollback function and the handbrake drive is only mechanical. Even when in good working order, Easytronic does not work very well. It has problems with starting on a hill and with a jerky driving rhythm. The box twitches and behaves like a not very experienced driver, but it takes care of the mechanical part. As for the device of the automatic part, the design is as simple as possible, and most of the breakdowns are either burnout of the power stage of clutch control due to overloading, or breakdowns of electric motors of drives. There are 3 of them here. Most often the clutch motor dies. Usually it happens because of wear of brushes or bearing wedge at mileage of 120 to 150,000. Everything is repaired very inexpensively, if you know what to do, and the service has no desire to divorce you for repair. Another disadvantage is that the control unit in the underhood space is not characterized by tightness even from the factory, and after the naughty hands of services it is filled with frightening regularity, literally at each washing of the motor. Also, there is not very high quality wiring and the need for regular adaptation, so as not to overload the power part of the drive, electronics, and improve the smoothness of operation. With mileage over 200, there are also selector failures and wear of mechanics of the shifting mechanism. About boxes, Aizen is told in quite detail in reviews S60 XC90 of the first generation, as well as S80 second generation. In general, these are very good boxes, which, however, require frequent oil changes, better once in 30 or once in 45,000, and do not like overheating. However, during operation on Vectra C 5-speed boxes had a serious trouble. The heat exchanger in Valeo radiators had a design defect. As a result, antifreeze got into the ATF, quickly killing the box. Later, the radiator was modernized by changing the design of rings, and after 2004, this problem did not happen anymore. Early versions of automatic transmissions produced before 2003 are more capricious than later 55 to 51, at mileage about 120 to 150,000. They had quite a lot of problems with the hydraulic block, but now you are unlikely to encounter such a low mileage early car. In later Vectras, provided regular oil changes and absence of overheating, these boxes are very resourceful and can run 350 plus before the first serious problems, except with replacement of the torque converter lockup lining. Well, to combat overheating it is desirable to put an additional radiator and filter on them. The sturdier 6-speed automatic transmission will initially be more reliable even when used with very powerful motors. The main thing, again, do not allow overheating, and in the case of the 2.8T engine they happen regularly. Oil in active city driving overheats up to 120 plus degrees, causing leaks of hoses of the cooling system of automatic transmission, wear of oil pump and accelerated aging of pistons of the box, and then pressure leaks. Hydro transformer here is more complicated by design with locking solenoid vulnerable to dirty oil. As well as in the majority of cars with Isoni, on hydromechanical Vectra there are troubles due to failures of automatic transmission. Selector, but it happens rarely and costs inexpensively. And it also indirectly speaks about high, over 350,000, mileage of the car. Motors. General problems. It is worth recognizing that the failure of Opel in terms of competition with Audi, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz is not only due to image. It is simply cheaper and less thoroughly made, and this is noticeable in many things. On the positive side, it is relatively simple and repairable. As with the body, a lot of problems are caused by the economy style of operation. Many owners like to pour cheap GM 5W30 oil and change it once in 15,000, as well as use the most budget components and lubricants. Taking into account the hot nature of atmospheric motors, the number of failures due to oil and antifreeze leaks is quite high. The first problems began in Vectra drivers already by 5 years. On the other hand, experienced and responsible owners who understand the peculiarities of operation, reducing the intervals of oil, change and engine temperature, rejoice in the cheapness and ease of operation of such motors. But not all of them. Gasoline motors, small displacement pre-restyle motors. The 1.6 and 1.8 on the pre-restyle are the Z16XE and Z18XE. These are motors in a very old block. They trace their pedigree back as far as 1982. Its design is literally nothing extra. Cast iron block, 16-valve cylinder heads, timing belt drive, hydrocompensators, no phase adjusters, coaxial oil pump on the crankshaft. Simple thermostat, simple crankcase ventilation, VKG, without valves, electronic throttle, ignition module for 4 coils, adjustable. Intake manifold and catcalator at the outlet. Strange as it may seem, these motors cannot boast of trouble-free operation and special resource. The resource of the piston group is 350 plus thousand kilometers, rarely more. But the cylinder head unit turned out to be a weak point. The gaps in the valve guide were rapidly growing. Oil spoilage at city operation and original oil with replacement once in 15 began relatively early, by 150,000 kilometers, mainly because of easily coking oil rings, which clearly lacked oil drain holes. The latter circumstance added a lot of problems to the owners. This is now various compositions for decoking are readily available, but in the past the only way to clean the oil rings was disassembly. Many people call it overhaul, but in most cases there was no machining or even removal of the engine. In direct sense, the above-mentioned cylinder head with its valve guides adds oil to the fire. Raskixovka rings, replacement of guides and lapping valves usually prolongs the life of the motor for 100,000, after which follows a real overhaul with cylinder boring under the repair size of pistons. In addition to increased chances of oil appetite, there are problems with engine control unit failures. It is located right on the cylinder head and overheats a lot. And further, the owner has a lot of problems, because in Opel all systems tried to bind as firmly as possible to a particular car. As a consequence, certain difficulties with rebinding of second-hand ECUs, although they have lost their sharpness in recent years. Now they have learned to break almost everything, but in the noughties the owner often had to buy a new unit. On other Vectra C motors such a problem also occurs, but much rarer, and usually nobody bothers with alterations. Minor troubles meet with leaky intake, breakage of intake geometry flaps, leaks with clogged VKG, failure of DPKV and DPDS sensors. Because of broken wires, intake corking because of EGR valve, pollution of DMRV, weak ignition module, it is one piece, as a cassette. On Saab, it costs cheaper, but still expensive, and not very successful wiring. We can also recall leaks in the cooling system, not cheap one-piece original pipes, wear of the throttle, cracks of the exhaust, manifold of simplified shape without horns, weak gaskets, delicate corrugations of the exhaust. In short, to cheaply operate such a motor at more than 15 years of age, you need to know a lot of nuances, such as from where and from what old engines what pipe fits, how to move the brains, where they are repaired, what throttle seals, to change and how to wash, how to disassemble the intake, how best to plug EGR and blow off oxygen sensors, etc. Yes, all problems have solutions, often inexpensive and effective. But in the stock, these are just rather capricious and weak engines. Only those who know how to cook them will enjoy them. Small displacement post-restyle motors, newer motors 1.6 Z16XE, 100 horsepower, and 1.8 Z18XER, 140 horsepower, formerly belong to the same family. And the differences, at first glance, are small, except for phase controllers on the inlet and outlet. In fact, the motor has changed significantly. The block is slightly different, more reliable cylinder head with channels for phaser regulators and 2 control valves, oil heat exchanger. On the front wall under the catalytic converter and controlled thermostat. From the big pluses, more torque due to phase controllers, more power, no problems with the brains of the engine, are successful. Exhaust manifold and much less intake clogging, because there is no EGR and DMRV, the wear of which often led to increased fuel consumption. However, in addition, the new design has got a lot of minuses. First of all, the trouble is that the engine temperature has increased. There is a hot controlled thermostat at 106 degrees, and fans are included even later. And the heater in the thermostat often dies. On many firmware even check does not light up, except that the fans are included at 80 degrees at full speed. At such temperatures, the wear of all rubber and plastic elements of the design is very strong. In the end, the cylinder head cover warps, all gaskets leak, the VKG dies, and the wiring quickly becomes brittle. Almost all of the engine's woes are related to its high temperature. The heat exchanger for oil is a useful thing in general, but given the increased temperature of the motor and oil, the gaskets start to leak after 2 or 3 years. This is a real trouble, because it is very difficult to find fluorocarbon gaskets, which would definitely withstand 5-6 years of operation. Even the original ones are obviously made of cheaper materials, and among the non-original are found only installation parties. You cannot rely even on the expensive ones. The saddest thing is that antifreeze can go into the oil, but there are enough leaks of oil and antifreeze, especially if the temperature is low and the engine is not warmed up. The problem is so severe that many people weld the heat exchanger, effectively shutting it off. Nobody has thought of buying fluorocarbons in plates and cutting gaskets on their own, though the solution is obvious. This motor does not have hydrocompensators anymore, so it is necessary to adjust valves once in 60,000. But in fact, the gaps can go earlier, so it is necessary to make checks. The new VKG system with PCV valve makes the motor drier. The number of leaks is radically reduced, but in case of valve diaphragm breakage it bleeds oil more than the old version. But the engine number is lasered on the block, and it corrodes on a completely dry block. These are the unexpected consequences. The phase control system suffers from oil clogging products getting into the valve nets at first. The nets must be cleaned, otherwise malfunctions occur. Sometimes the valves themselves fail. And at mileage of 150 plus, it is necessary to change seals of phaser regulators or gears themselves because of leaks. The timing belt is reliable, goes 150 plus thousand, but in cold regions with sweating it is better to change it at the maximum of 90,000. And use the original oil resistant. Oil appetite, unfortunately, occurs at the same approximate mileage and under the same conditions. Detonation due to overheating, which can damage pistons as well. However, it is not all that bad. When installing a cold thermostat at 82 to 90 degrees and lowering the fan shutdown temperature, new motors are definitely better than old ones. The piston in this case goes its 250 plus without oil consumption, and after it even with intervals of maintenance once in 15,000 grows slowly. Heat exchanger leaks at lower temperatures also become extremely rare. Early 2.2 motors, the next engine 2.2, Z22 SE, 147 horsepower, belongs to a completely different family, and, good news, you can buy it with a normal hydromechanical automatic transmission. The motor looks good, but only at first glance and for those who have not owned an Opel yet. There is an aluminum block, cast iron liners, timing drive, balancer shafts, and pump by chain. With low mileage and dealer service, the motor really pleased. It is noticeably more vigorous than 1.8, even restyled, and even. With automatic transmission, the car with it is fast enough and economical. But by 120 to 150,000 began to come out problems with timing and with cracks of the cylinder head in the plug wells. And very early motors of 2002 could have problems with the chain and at lower mileage, but there the trouble was eliminated under warranty by installing a new chain lubrication nozzle and tensioners of a new type. Problems with the timing were not in sharp wear of the chain. Its stretching was usually stable, with the forecast of replacement. At about 200 plus thousand, which by today's standards is just fine, but for the beginning of the century, acceptable. It was expensive to replace, $40K for 2006, but once every 200K you could tolerate it. Worse, it started to tear out the studs fixing the calipers in the cylinder head. It turned out that the head of the block is not cast, but made of secondary aluminum, from these balls. It does not lend itself to welding, easily cracks when the torque on bolts and studs is exceeded and, most dangerously, when tightening tapered spark plugs. Ceramic valve guides crack with any problems and need to be replaced. When going to non-dealer service, few people followed the bolt torque when replacing spark plugs and the pump with its chain drive. So the number of problems only grew. At mileage of 250 plus, 2.2 motors often showed oil appetite. It is most often connected not with design flaws, as in 1.6-18, but more due to low quality of original GM oil and inadequately long intervals of replacement, once in 15,000. And here it turned out to be terrible. There are no repair sizes, which is a novelty for Opel motors. Previously, General Motors did not offer such unrepairable motors, and in the clubs of Opel drivers it caused another wave of rage. Before the advent of liner swaps, non-original pistons, cheaper timing kits from Cloys, that's the original kit manufacturer for GM, the motor was considered extremely unfortunate for a long time. But successful attempts at installing a normal cast cylinder head from the Z20net B207 motors and cheapening of all components now make the shortcomings not so significant. Late 2.2 motors, the 155 horsepower 2.2 Z22YH motors are a late version of the Z22 SE direct injection motor. Problems with the fuel equipment for a long time made this engine almost the most demonized, but now there are no special problems with direct injection. The fuel injector is relatively inexpensive. Injectors are repairable, everything is diagnosed. But it is still more capricious than motors with simple injection, and there is no gain in dynamics and economy. Early versions before 2006 really should not be bought, and on cars after restyling it is quite a working option, if you are ready. To the price of repairs of motors of this family, and are ready to look for related Chevrolet motors to buy original components. After all, with GM leaving our market and selling Opel, original parts have gotten more expensive and are partially gone. Turbocharged 2.0-liter 170 horsepower Z20net motors have another designation, B207E or B207R, with such codes they were used in Saab 9-3, but they have the engine number in the Opel catalogue, so you can put Swedish motors on German cars without problems with documentation. In fact, it is a supercharged version of the Z22 SE motor, but it has a cast cylinder head, so it does not have cracks and problems. With studs, but, as well as any supercharged motor, it is much more demanding to service, and the variants of 2007 to 2008 are also distinguished by the presence of problems with valve springs. Tuning potential is not very high, up to about 280 horsepower. With the decrease in prices for a set of timing gears, its minuses on the general background have significantly decreased. Atmospheric V6S. The 3.2 motor with the code Z32SE exists in two versions. The Vectra C has the motor in the same block as the 2.5, 2.6, and 3.0 on the Vectra B and Omega B, with belt-driven timing. From the V6 54-degree range. The old motor isn't bad, although it's voracious and heavy. Cast iron block, 24 valves, no phasing, strong belt, good life and traction. However, it is very large and tightly fitted in the engine compartment, so it is not cheap to maintain. The main problem is a weak oil pump. With mileage over 250, it is necessary to monitor oil pressure in summer. 5W30 oil can ruin liners. So it is better to use more viscous ones and put an oil pressure gauge at the same time. Alas, the heat exchanger in the block collapse, corrosion of which often leads to emulsion, has not gone anywhere. Cracking exhaust manifolds, unsuccessful location of the thermostat in the block collapse, frozen and old-fashioned vacuum system also add a little trouble. Turbocharged V6S, the 2.8T motors belong to the new high-feature family, the LP9 series. The 230 to 280 horsepower versions are essentially variants of the same motor. The design with aluminum block, chain-driven timing, and supercharging is just a treasure trove of expensive and strange solutions. It was developed from the backside of the earth, in Australia, and it is strongly felt. It is disposable, like the Z22 SE, and it has not 2 but 3 chains. Plus lots of fun design nuances like bolt washers. Also, it was often modernized, not caring about releasing repair timing kits for older versions. All in all, it's another not for everyone motor. It has a good potential for tuning, but it is unreasonably expensive and troublesome to repair. Diesel engines, we have very few diesel Vectras, but a lot of them in Belarus. The old Opel 2.0 and 2.2-litre Y20 DTH, Y20 DTL, Y22 DTR diesel engines are successful only from the point of view of mechanics. Cast iron block, very reliable chain timing and reliable oil pump. It is absolutely impossible to overload them at low speeds. The liners wear easily at such a mode, and the crankshaft can be overloaded. All other troubles are caused by the presence of the Boschevsky fuel injector VP44, which does not like low-quality diesel fuel. Its keys overheat, mechanics wear out, and it costs as 2 Vectras. However, experienced diesel specialists from the neighboring country fix all this, and they remove good 170 forces from motors. Motors 1, 9Z19 DTL and Z19 DTH, which Opel has received within cooperation with Fiat, are really good. Except that the breakdowns of rockers and vortex flaps on more powerful 16-valve versions slightly overshadow the idle. Italians also put plastic T's of return on the injectors, which Russian masters with their fingers break at once. Reverse assembly is done on sealant without gaskets, and in the Russian countryside the classic red is often used, not oil-soluble. And the quality of work leaves much to be desired. Detail original price of non-original 2-engine radiator, 13,535 Valeo 8,556 Nissan's 6,877 timing belt Z18Xa. 4,589 Dayco 1,672 Conitec 2005 timing set, Z18Xa 957 ENA 8183 Dayco 7100 pump, Z18Xa 3095 Airtex 1593 Herpu 3329. It is a pity that with all the richness of choice, in fact, the only adequate variant of second-hand Vectra is a Motor 1.8 after restyling with MKP or Turbo Diesel 1.9, which can be taken with an automatic. In recent years, cars with 2.2 and 2.0 turbo motors have become a little better looking. Yes, they have a lot of nuances. Just on the motor, but they at least have a balance of consumer qualities of the car and the cost of maintenance. Everything else leaves a mixed impression. We could say that this is a car for fans, but it is not clear, fans of what. In conclusion, the Opel Vectra C presents a unique case study in automotive engineering, particularly when it comes to its self-destructing. boxes, and the innovative use of recycled cylinder heads. While the mileage may raise concerns about longevity and reliability, understanding these components can help owners make informed decisions about maintenance and repairs. By addressing these issues proactively, drivers can extend the life of their vehicles and enjoy the performance that the Vectra C has to offer. Thank you for watching, and we hope this insight into the Opel Vectra C has been helpful for you.